Oh, wow.
Huh. What a question.
Canisia, if you're going to spend a few days writing, how do you stock your fridge and/or pantry?
My imaginary pantry would be stocked with mangoes. If mangoes could last for a week in my house, they don't typically. And tea. I don't know, you see, the thing is, typically, when I'm writing and I'm deep into it, I forget about food until I feel some kind of pain that says, you are hungry, get something. But usually there's lots of tea, and I love mangoes. Renee, Derek Walcott in Map of the World wrote, quote, "At the end of this sentence, rain will begin. What of the world appears for you in your vision of your craft?"
Oh, wow. I think the thing that is, for me, most present from the world in my writing is the utter offness of the relationship of what we do in time with our thinking about having done it or our awareness of it happening. The fact that we are often or always, just by nature of how language works in relation to thinking behind ourselves, and the way that just affects and explodes everything when you come to write. It just messes up time, it messes up memory. And I think that a lot of us are confused. I really feel like confusion is a huge part of human beingness. And so that's something that I really covet in my writing is the feeling of not knowing and using not knowing or confusion as a mode of perception. So the part of the world that we don't know and that is confusing is what I hope is most in my work.
Canisia, heavy enjambment in a poem can often serve as an aporia, a little death, a coma, a moment for the enthymeme of a poem to come to the surface for the reader. Can you discuss the use of heavy enjambment in the Disigraphist to create new meanings within the text of the poem?
The first thing is to allow rhythm to have a commensurate measure with meaning. And what that means for me is part of what I was trying to do with the Disigraphist is to create a kind of breakage in the language that will allow some kind of newness to surface. And so it's always interesting to me to have that sense of starting and stopping and restarting, even if it's just an illusory kind of thing. And to create that sense of breakage that I wanted in the Disigraphist, because what I'm doing is I'm using Creole syntax to interrupt the meaning, the kind of smooth meaning that we tend to get in the syntax of English. And what that does for me ultimately is that it allows for a different appreciation of a gesture, of starting something and not rounding it up in any neat way to tell the reader what to think. What it is are a series, it's a series of impressions that amount to something. And I want the reader to decide what that something is, you know? And so that sense of enjambment, the heavy enjambment, allows for polysemy, for meaning to pile up, for meaning to create multiple resonances. Vivian, hello. I want to know, what is the greatest, smallest thing you've been given?
So I'll take it in the abstract. We're not going to do this materially because there's nothing material that I value. I don't know how small this is. It's not very large, but it's large enough. My ability to give up grudges quickly is something I value immensely. And I feel that's been given to me. I don't feel I worked so hard for it. I feel that was given to me.
Canisia, if you had to present on the space of the poem space, at an architectural conference, how would you make that topic enterable or navigable for architects?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think about architects unless unless I have reason to think about architects. I guess you use the page as landscape. You know, what are the landmarks for the various points of feeling through the poem, and what does that do in an actual 3D physical space? What would that look like? You know, maybe that. But that's a very big question, Renee. Ask me again sometime, I might have a different answer. Natalie, can you tell us how borders can help us think differently about mastery and control in language today?
One of the things that I'm always really interested in are formal constraints within a poem. So whenever I am drafting a poem, I am always sort of tinkering with language, but not just tinkering with language as in this is what I want to say or the narrative that perhaps I want to explore, but also thinking about the formal look of the poem, the way that the words sound and bounce off of each other, and fitting those things within the confines of the page or the form that I've selected for that piece. And I think a lot of my fascination with forms inevitably comes from growing up in this border space where I was always asked to be in kind of confined situations and find ways to express personhood and selfhood when you're always being asked to become a number, right? Or to become that biometric scan and lose personhood. And so I think that border spaces concretely provide a really interesting way to express personhood and selfhood and experience, just metaphorically speaking. You can learn forms of existence that otherwise I think you might not force yourself to confront if it weren't for that, right? If it weren't for that situation.
Hello, Kate. What, as a translator, have you had to rethink about how meaning is created? Or if nothing has changed in your thinking, does a hawk and an ostrich cause you to think differently about the verb to fly?
I probably didn't think especially deeply about how meaning is created until I started translating. So I think translation has been this kind of ongoing education and kind of troubling around how meaning is created. Each translation decision at the level of the micro and the macro is its own inquiry, new inquiry, renewed inquiry into how meaning is created. I think that's how I would answer that rich first question. And then the second question, well, to fly, I think as translators, you're often dealing with these kind of the relationship between general categories and more specific local ones. So like the general verb to fly, which would be a kind of catch-all verb, I guess. And then within that, you have further specificities like to soar, or to swoop, or to flutter, or to not fly would be a counterexample. So that would be my question. Yeah, how much can to fly hold? How many kind of forms of flying can to fly hold? And at what point in a kind of meaning-making process or a reproduction process might you want to localize and specify the form of flying or not flying or failing to fly? Canisia, my question to you, well, it's an invitation. I'd like to ask you to talk to me more about poetry and companionship, or maybe poetry as companionship. And this question was prompted by what I found to be the very beautiful and generous way that you thank your companions at the close of your poetry collection. And it seemed to me that I surmised that poetry as a practice is about a form of kind of thinking with, or talking with, or writing with across languages, cultures, histories, in friendship, or perhaps not always in friendship. So that's my intuition from reading your work, and I wondered if you could expand on this for me and tell me whether I've got it right or not at all.
Thank you for that lovely question, Kate. Yes, all of that is true. I think writing for me is a practice of relation, a practice of relationality, a practice of the kind of ethics of what it is to be alive together in space and time, in motion, in stoppage. And that's poetry. The momentum of a poem depends on how language can make these various things come alive. And I have felt a really deep companionship with the work of others, with work that opens up the world for me newly, that helps me break something open for myself also. And so naming those writers and thinkers and artists who accompany me through that journey, I think is vital. It's a vital part of the actual work that a poem does, because the poem stops. It doesn't end. And so what continues with the reader, I am also the reader, what continues beyond where the poem stops has everything to do with what I owe to the people who help me think and feel and move through the world through poetry. So that sense of being alongside in ways that challenge, in ways that harmonize, in ways that create dissonance, but I'm always looking for something generative. And that is what the poem allows for us to do, to be generative within language, not always to dominate and to think primarily that something must be comprehended. You know, sometimes what you have is a gesture, and you take that gesture into the next thing, into the next hour, into the next day, you know? And so every time I come back to the page, I always want to be aware of the people who've helped me, the writers who've helped me, the artists, the thinkers who've helped me arrive at those things.